Alright, so the first typographic device that most graphic designers like to use, especially when doing multiple pages, is to use what's called a grid layout. So for this demonstration, I've set up a grid. Now we've worked with grids just a little bit. Whenever you create a new document, especially in InDesign, so if you go to File and New Document, the first portion of a grid is setting up your margins or setting up your columns. All the grid allows you to do is it gives you the space, it defines the space where everything goes in. Think of it as kind of like laying the foundation for a house. If you lay a good foundation, you know exactly what the house is going to look like. Doesn't matter what the details are, you know where rooms can be, how tall it can be, where most of the major masses are going to be at. Well, that's what laying out the grid on a page layout allows you to do. First of all, you can tell by the pink lines, I've set up an inner margin. So everything that I have is going to have this ½ inch margin on the left and right side and I think a full 3/4 inch down at the bottom. So when I do lay out things, I don't want to have anything going beyond this, so all of my pages will be consistent. I've also set up some grid lines using the blue lines. Let's see, I'll close this out. To place other things, and when I get to the next page, I'll show you exactly what it looks like. But having a grid, having some sort of markation to say where everything is at is very helpful because it allows to have consistency from one page to the next page. So this is how I laid out or used my grid when working within, when working for this particular type of layout. Notice that my blue lines, so this blue line at the top kind of gives you an idea of where I can put my headers and information. I don't have to worry about where it should go. I just know it's going to go right there. And I can have it consistent. If I made another page, you would know it would go right there. Same way for any major graphics that I have. So the headline will always stay along this baseline throughout multiple different pages, even if there's nothing over there. If I had to put another headline, all I have to do is copy it and keep it along that top headline, and now it's going to stay consistent along that baseline. Same thing for other type of graphics, just to make sure everything lines up and works well within the grid. Sometimes you can get some really complex grids. Tell you what, let's go to Google, see what we can get. Let's see, grid layout. You also use grids an awful lot whenever you do web page design because you want everything to be laid out perfectly the same. So here's a great example of a grid layout for this page layout. Everything stays within multiple columns. You can see this area would be one column, same way with this one, and they define the gutter at that size as well. Let's not go to it. Let's go back. Let's see if I can do a web page grid. Web page grids define the same thing. So when you lay out something, you know exactly how much space and where things should be when laying out something on your computer screen. Works the same way for, here's another thing for the grid system. This is just a great little thing to look up and to document whenever you lay out something. If you ever look at a newspaper, you know it's all in columns, not just in vertical columns, but try to look at the horizontal columns. Here's another type of grid layout from that one. Do y'all notice a grid layout when you're doing your research for this particular project? Did y'all see some sort of structure that each page was going through, one page to another? Maybe. Just one thing to think about. If you didn't know, if you want to drag off any guides, if you wanted to add extra guidelines to here, if you have your rulers turned on at the top and the left-hand side, you can click on the ruler and drag out. And when you release, that'll create a vertical guide, or at the top, click and drag down. It'll create a horizontal guide that you can now use for a grid layout is that way as well. So let's get into some nitty-gritty actual definitions. You can follow along with what I'm working with. First one is, of course, a headline. Headline is usually the main thing that draws people's attention to an article or to the main purpose of your layout in itself. In general, you want to use headline for a font. You'll want to use what's called a display type. Display types usually are sans serif, which means they don't have the little feet on top of them. Sans serif fonts are just easier to read if they're bigger. Serif fonts, like you see down here, like Times New Romans, the ones with the little extra feet on the end of each character, those are easier to scan and read. You can actually read these faster because of the serif fonts, and that's why you use the serif font for your body copy. It's not true in all cases, but in general, that's what you want to do. Keep a headline some sort of sans serif font, and keep your body copy as a serif type font. So this would be an example of a headline. Another thing akin to it is your subhead. Subheads, just like a headline, you'll want to keep those as a sans serif, and they're usually just a very, very brief sentence. It's, I believe I described it as a secondary headline. It's used to organize and to divide up your body copy. So take a look at the body copy I have here. Just by having a subhead, having little something to break it up, it allows me to kind of break up the my entire article into smaller chunks. I'm more likely to read something that's broken up into smaller bits than having to take on an entire article in itself. So as you're writing your report, maybe you'll want to break up each section into a different type of subhead. So as you're reading it, it looks a little more, flows a little better as an article in itself. Just as the same thing, you'll want to keep them a sans serif font, or at least something different or more bold that stands out from the rest of your body copy. You wouldn't want to have it the same font, else it looks very similar to what you're working with. So the second one would be a subhead. Kind of akin to a subhead is this area in here. This is called a block quote. Whenever you want to give a quotation from someone, and it's usually longer than one sentence, you'll want to kind of break it apart and pull it out somehow, make it more noticeable from the rest of the body copy. And that's what you're doing here as a block quote. Block quotes are usually smaller in point size, and what I've done is I've inset it a little bit from the outer edges. This way, even if I backed up, you can kind of tell, hey, this is something that's a little bit different. Sometimes people will like to put these in italics just to make them that much smaller or that much more contrasting from the rest of it. To set something in the way I've done, so notice I can highlight it, this is where your indentation at the top right hand side comes into play. So this first one is the left indent, so I can push it in that far. I think I only pushed it in 1/4 of an inch. And the other one is the right indent. So I gave it 1/4 of an inch on the left and on the right hand side. And just that little bit gives it enough contrast between these two. I also dropped down the point size. Right now I've got it set to 10 point, whereas the rest of my body copy is set to 12 point. But just having that block quote, that entire quotation that someone would give set apart, really makes it a little bit easier to distinguish. Another great way of kind of adding some visual interest to your entire layout is to have what's called a pull quote. This would be an example of find some sentence or some small little quote, something that's within your article that's really interesting. Maybe something that sums up the entire article that you're trying to lay out. You'll pull it out, make it in my own little text box, and make it much larger. I also put mine in italics. Having this kind of set off from the rest of the entire article that I'm laying out draws my eye directly to this area. And since it's a short sentence, I'm more likely to read a small sentence, a pull quote from this entire body copy. Literally, to get a pull quote, find the sentence that's in here and just copy it and then paste it into here. You're going to be repeating it twice, but that's the purpose of the pull quote, is like, where did that quote come from? Why did they say that? Also, when you do a pull quote, you want to make sure that it has enough contrast from the rest of your entire body copy. What I like to do is to add just some lines at the top and bottom of it, and when I place it in here, I'm going to select all of them. Say if I pulled it out of the way, I didn't get my lines. There we go. If I pulled it out of the way, I would put a pull quote in between two different paragraphs, because you wouldn't want to put it like in the middle of a paragraph and then have someone have to read over and read in between it. Place it between two paragraphs and have the text wrap around as necessary from there. Does that make sense? So that's what a pull quote allows you to do. It emphasizes one particular sentence. Let's see. Another thing you could have to add some visual interest to what you have, if you do have some sort of picture, in my case I just had a blank picture that I'm working on, Underneath it, if you're giving a description of the picture, it's called a caption. Usually the caption is a single sentence or a couple of sentences that describes it. What I like to do is to have one or two words that just describes what the picture is and then lead on into the sentence. In my case, I set it off by having it in smaller type and having it in italics. If you did want to have more information, you can have what's called a call out, and that's what this box, let's turn off that. That's what this leader box allows you to do. Having, say, an arrow or a line drawing from an image down to a smaller area, a call out is what indicates that there's more information about an illustration in itself, a little more than just a caption that's underneath it. This way you can go into fuller detail. Usually call-outs are several sentences, not just one small sentence that you would have into a caption that way. But as long as you have a line or something directing you towards where your call-out is, that's best to work with from there. Let's see, what's another one? Okay, if you look down at the very bottom of the page, if you ever see the page number, page whatever, or if it's just the number by itself, that's called a folio. If someone ever asks you, hey, I need to add a folio to your page, that's what they're talking about. It's just the page number by itself. If there's ever any other information, this is called your footer. Sometimes it's called a running foot. But this is where if you read a newspaper and you're on the sports section, you would entitle this sports section, or you entitle it business or whatever chapter of a book that perhaps you're in. So you know what page you're on and also what area that you're set off to. So there's the footer, and there's also the folio down on that side. The main thing to remember about setting up page numbers is most people are just accustomed to seeing at the bottom left and bottom right side of a two-page spread. So you kind of want to be consistent with that. Some people put them in the middle of a page. Very rarely do you see them in the spine of the page just because it gets lost when working that way. But as long as you're consistent page by page, that's the main thing you're looking for. Another thing to notice how I've got my folio followed by the footer. On the right-hand page, I've got the footer followed by the folio. You want to have it mirrored image on one another. The brother of the footer at the bottom of the page is the header at the top of the page. Header basically does the same thing as a footer does, it's just at the head of the page, it's at the top. So this is again where you would put, if you're working on a newspaper, what section you're on, or if you're laying out a book, this would be maybe a chapter title or chapter head at the top of it as well. Let's see, got that, pull quotes. On this page, kind of doing the same thing, you can have a caption, not just for an image, but also if you have a list of information, this would be a table of information. Tables can be laid out in a variety of different ways. They don't have to be as boring as just having information. Add color to it, add as many graphics to it as possible. That's what a table just allows you to quickly assess multiple different information. It's usually arranged in a grid type pattern. If you're listing out different fonts, if you're listing out different items within an area, make sure you have some sort of leader. In this case, you can do a bullet point. Bullet points are kind of cliche. Some people like to add a dingbat or some sort of a little graphic inside of it. That's what we did for the second project. Let's see, I'll zoom in. If you don't know how to add a graphic, you can always highlight where you want to put your graphic, go to Type, and choose Glyphs. Glyphs will list out every character for a font that you're working on. And you can change your font down at the very bottom, left-hand side. Let's see, Zapf Dingbats, and there's also the Wingdings, Webdings. These are all different types of glyphs that you can work with. And all you gotta do is double-click on them, so now you've got that one as a leader. So all I'd have to do to, instead of using a bullet point, is just copy and paste that one, and paste it into there as well. Bullet points are just very, very cliche, so I try to avoid them if possible. They add just that much more visual interest to any list that you particularly have. Let's see, I think the last thing that I'll point out is your sidebar, which is this area down here. A sidebar kind of works like a call-out. It's just another area that you can fill up a space with more information about what's on your entire page. So if you have, say, you're typing about an artist and you have just a little bit of information maybe about their first client that they worked for, or their marriage, or some interesting thing that happened, rather than including it in your entire layout, pull out a sidebar, make it visually contrasting. In this case, I gave it a dark background with white on top of it, reverse type, and put the information within that sidebar. If someone's not interested in reading your entire article, at least they'll maybe be drawn to the sidebar and have visual interest for that type of layout. If anything, it just takes up space. If you don't have enough space to fill up an entire page, let's see, this is what it would look like if I didn't have my sidebar. This is what it would look like if I didn't have a table that's inside of there. There's just not enough room to fill up the entire 2 pages that I'm working with based on the text that I was given. This is just a great way of quickly adding some visual interest to a multiple page layout that you're working from. All good? Did I skip over anything? If y'all were moving from there? Okay. I'm going to turn your computers back over to you. Remember, today and tomorrow is the last day to work in class to get this project finished up. So if you have any questions or you need to do anything, this would be the time to do it.